My name is Dorothy Singer Casey.
And where were you born?
I was born in Middleport, Ohio,
And where were you born?
in November 1926.
I was born in November.
1926.
Okay. And if you can just repeat the question back for me. Were you born at home or in a hospital?
I was born at home.
Oh. How many of you were born at home?
I have,
Growing up in your home, being the third child, and were you the first girl born?
no, I was the third girl.
Third girl, okay.
Uh-huh.
So what was that like for you growing up in your household?
Oh, it was a beautiful experience. Everyone should have such an experience because we lived in a double house. My grandparents lived on one side, and our family lived on the other side. And it made it so pleasant because we had so many people who were in charge of us, but so many people that loved us.
And when you say you had so many people that were in charge of you, what do you mean by that?
My grandparents had the same authority as my parents. They disciplined the same as my parents did. And any elder person was able to do that at that time, which was a beautiful thing too, in a sense.
Speaking of discipline, what kind of discipline would you have gotten if you were disciplined for whatever?
Oh, I've received spankings. My parents believed in spanking. At that time, that was not unusual. Probably this day and time, 911 would have to come.
I understand what you're saying. Going back to the household, your mother and father, let's start with your father. What kind of work did your father do?
My father was at the beginning of my life a coal miner. He worked in the coal mines in Pomeroy, Ohio. And then later, he got an engineering degree and worked on a steamboat on the river.
And how long did he work as an engineer on the river?
Till he retired.
And when you say the river, what river are you talking about?
Ohio River, Mississippi on down. Up and down the Ohio and the Mississippi.
Where did he go to school?
He went to school in Middleport. He was born and raised in Middleport too.
Did he ever talk about his riverboat experiences when he came
Oh
home?
yes.
Can you remember any of those stories he might have talked about?
Well, not anything specific. No, he just talked about the different people he worked with. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed the job.
Well, can you give me your father's full name?
His name was James Henry Singer.
And your mother, what was her full name, including her maiden name?
Her name was Anna English Singer.
And how did your father, he was born in Ohio.
Yes.
Did he ever talk about how his parents got here?
Well, his parents were from up around Athens, Ohio, up in that area, in Zanesville, and then around that part of the country. And on his mother's side, there was quite an Indian influence. On his father's side, the same. So.
Did he talk much about that? Did your father talk much about his grandparents? His father?
His father? No, not much.
Did he talk much about the Native American?
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
What was it you might have heard him say?
Oh, just that he was mostly Indian, and his mother looked like a big Indian lady. My grandmother. She looked strictly Indian.
What was her name?
Her name was Florence Singer.
And I'm going to come back to that later on. But give your mother, what kind of work did she do, and did she ever work outside the home?
My mother was a cook at a hotel,
And
and my grandmother was too.
And where did they work?
Martin Hotel in Pomeroy, Ohio.
How many years would you say she worked there?
She worked there until she passed. She was a young woman when she passed, though. She was about 40.
So when was your mother born?
I have to count that up. Let's see. My mother probably was born in 1890 something. I'm not sure.
Okay. the hotel still there?
No, they've torn it down.
Oh, they torn it down?
It's torn down.
And you said your grandmother, and what was your grandmother's name? Worked there also?
My grandmother's name was Carrie Stewart English.
And how many years did she work there at the hotel?
Well, she worked there years before my mother did, and then, of course, my mother got a job there, too. So I'd say she worked there, I'd say at least 25 or 30 years.
Did they come home and talk about any of the incidents that might have happened at the hotel?
Well, no, we didn't hear too much about that, but I do remember that the hotel and ran it, they were extremely generous people because, see, at the time we were children, it was directly after the Depression, and times were hard, and we always had the best of food, no matter how many children there were, we always had the best of everything because she was generous with everything from the hotel.
Can you give me the names of your brothers and sisters and maybe a little bit?
For a minute, just
Okay.
until they go.
Okay, hold it.
You would like the names of my brothers and sisters?
Yes.
Well, I'll start with my oldest. My oldest sister's name is Florence. Florence, you want the married names? Moore. She lives in Canton, Ohio. My second oldest sister's name is Marcia Sawyers, and she is at a rest home in Columbus, Ohio. And of course, I'm the third. And my next sister is deceased. Her name was Anna Margaret Euler. And after her was my brother, the first brother I ever had. His name was James Albert Singer, and he's deceased. And after him was Rita Hogan. Rita Singer, let's see, she's married again. So her name is, I'm not sure, I forgot. Went out of my head. We just say Rita Hogan, that was her name. Then I have twin sisters, and their name is Jane Harper. She lives here. She's the only sister I have locally. She lives here. And her twin sister's name was Joanne. Isn't that terrible? Can't remember. She's deceased. She's been dead for quite a while. Her name was Joanne. And then my next sister's name was Helen. Her name is Helen Owen. She lives in Columbus, Ohio. And then I have another sister named Susan Alexander. She lives in Columbus, Ohio. And I have one brother living. His name is Roland Singer. He lives in Philadelphia. And I have another younger brother who's deceased. His name was John.
Very good. As brothers and sisters, did you get along pretty well growing up?
Yes, because I was one of the older ones. Of course, I had to help take care of all the younger ones. So, and I married young. I was 20 years old when I got married, so I left home young. But we got along very well. We had the normal confusion going on in our house, disputes and.
How were they handled? How were the disputes handled?
Well, my dad, when he was home, which when he went on the river wasn't home too much, but they were handled very well by either my grandmother, my father. My mother wasn't much of a disciplinarian. She was very soft-hearted, and she didn't have too much to do with that.
And how was the chores distributed?
Everyone had to take their turn doing whatever had to be done. And to this day, I have refused to put anything else in a jar because from the time I was 3 years old, they stood me on a stool and made me wash jars to make apple butter. So I did that. I've done that all my life. I've canned, and now I do not put anything in a jar.
Did you ever graduate from cleaning the jars to?
Oh yeah, well, I got to the place where I had to help to prepare the things that were going to fill them.
And where did you get your vegetables and fruits from?
We grew them. We always had a big garden. We always raised a hog and a cow and butchered every year.
Did you live on a farm? Was that
No, we didn't live on a farm. We lived in a rural area where we had room enough to have that.
And did you do much going into town or?
Oh, well, wasn't far out of town. Didn't have far to go. Very easy to walk to town.
What was the name of the place where your house was located? Did it have a name?
It was on 4th Avenue in Middleport.
What's 4th Avenue in Middleport like now?
Oh, basically the same. Some houses are gone, but there's still quite a few of the same houses standing.
Is your house still there?
No, it's been torn down.
I want to go back to your mother, and she had 12 children, and how far apart were they spaced?
Well, my mother was 15 years old when she married, and there's usually about 2, 3, some 4 years space between them.
Did she ever talk about being a mother and what it was like for her to be a mother?
It was hard for her. It was very hard because there were so many of us, and it took everybody to raise us, everybody in the house.
What kind of household appliances did you have and did you use?
No, I can remember helping to wash on the washboard. I used to have to do that when I became a teenager. So, and I can remember when we didn't have electricity, no gas, we burned wood or coal. But then we progressed as times went on.
And I need to, for the next generation that's coming along, explain to me what you mean and what was the process of washing clothes on the washboard. What did you have to do?
Well, first you assembled everything, the tubs, the rinse tubs and the wash tubs. And of course, everybody made their own soap, so my grandmother had that ready. We had to heat the water on the coal stove, heat enough water to wash the clothes, and then heat enough to add cold water to it to rinse. And being so many of us, it was practically every day was wash day. And we had to hang them on the line no matter what the weather was. I've helped to hang clothes on the line when they froze the minute you put them there. They'd stand almost by themselves.
Anything else in that process, that washing the clothes, that you can think of that you had to do?
Well,
that happened?
had to get them off the line. They had to be taken off, folded, and ironed.
And how did you iron them?
With a flat iron heated on the stove.
Who taught you how to cook?
My grandmother and my mother.
And what process how did they teach you how to cook?
You had to get into the kitchen and help. So you learned how by observing and listening.
Okay. You ever thought you would be interviewed out in the country?
This is fine. Very relaxing.
It is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see, I forgot where I left off.
You were asking her about the iron.
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
How many irons did you have?
We had 2. We alternated. When one got too cold, then you got the other one off the stove.
Did you ever burn yourself?
Oh, yes. A lot of times. Still have the marks.
Okay. Yes. Did your other sisters, did all of them pitch in?
Sorry, you guys.
Okay.
No sirens.
Yeah.
I see. And you see the hospital's right over there.
Yes. Yeah. We're going on down the road. Just going after somebody.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about pitching in. Do you feel that the sisters pitched in equally, or did some kind of shrink?
Well, I don't dare say which ones, but some of them didn't do what they were supposed to.
And what happened in that case?
They were punished,
Hmm?
especially if we told.
Yep. Speaking of that,
What type of punishment?
Paddling, made to stay in, couldn't play.
what kind of instrument did they use for paddling?
My mother used switches.
I remember those myself.
My dad used to use a belt, which we hated. It was terrible.
Did he used to snap the belt? Just for my curiosity, did he used to snap the belt before he spanked you?
No, he didn't do that. But my mother talked the whole time she was switching, and that made it worse. And I found myself doing the same thing with my children. They didn't like that very well either.
But I can understand that. I don't know if I believe I asked you what year and month you were born. Would you share that with us?
November 21st, 1926.
What was it like for you going to school, starting with elementary school?
I never attended a segregated school. Like here in Gallipolis, they had a black school, and it wasn't integrated till after my oldest child was old enough for school. So I attended a integrated school, but they let us know we weren't white, but we were pretty well treated. Some of the teachers weren't too kind.
What was the name of the school?
Middleport Elementary and Middleport High School.
Was it the same feeling and condition for you as you went through elementary and high school about people letting you know that you weren't white?
Same. It was the
feeling?
same from the first grade on.
What was that like for you?
Well, it was just a fact of life that we accepted. You had to accept it. And of course, no matter what our grades were, at that time we weren't allowed to be in the National Honor Society or any of that. We didn't get much recognition for being better or excelling in anything.
And when you said the teachers didn't treat you fairly, how so?
They just didn't. They chastised you for the least little thing, whereas a white child, they wouldn't say anything to them about it. And guess I was kind of a rebel. I got in a lot of trouble because of that.
And considering, you say you got into a lot of trouble like that, what was it like for you when you went home and told your mother about
I got in more trouble.
Oh. Okay.
Teacher sent a note home and I was reprimanded again. So
Did your were your parents aware what was going on at
they
school?
knew, but it was a fact of life that they felt like I should accept. So,
When you were doing your homework and so forth, do you feel that you were given a fair assessment of your assignments? Were your grades, how do you feel about
I
your
received
grades?
good grades on my report cards, which I still have some. Very good grades, but the recognition that they gave the other children wasn't there for us.
And you said the schools here in Gallipolis were segregated till your oldest started?
Till my oldest son started school. He was the first black kindergarten student to go to school when it was integrated.
Integrated. But what year was that?
Let's see, he was born in 1946. He would be 6. It was about 1952.
So Gallipolis still had black segregated schools?
Yes, and they had to be forced to really integrate because, well, there was a lawsuit against the school board to make them because, it had come into law before that. They were to be integrated, and they hadn't done it. They were slow.
What was the name of the all-black school here in Gallia?
Why, it was Lincoln School. We had the old bell at John G. And, when they closed that school, they put everything out on the curb and threw it away. So there are no records of anything that happened there.
Where was it located?
It was located at the corner of 3rd Avenue and Olive Street. And the building's still standing, is now a furniture store. And the original gym is still the same as it was when they went to school there. Only there's furniture sitting up there, but the man that bought it kept it that way.
And what kind of school was it? Was it a one-room schoolhouse, two-room?
No, it wasn't a one-room school. Just very poor facilities and and not enough seats. Sometimes the students had to sit on the tables in the gym to attend class if there were very many of them, whereas the white schools downtown had everything.
So,
How many rooms were in the school?
You know, I'm not sure.
But
Up to the 8th grade, I think.
That's what
But there might have been two grades, you know, in one room at that time. Probably were.
what happened after 8th grade?
After 8th grade, well, they finally, I forget the year, but the school board had to be sued to allow the blacks to go to high school. They made a law that on Spruce Street, that was kind of the cutoff between the blacks and the whites. So most blacks lived on the other side of Spruce, and they had a law that if they fixed it, so if you didn't live on the opposite side and down, you couldn't attend the high school. So it just happened, they forgot about one black man living there. His name was Mitchell, and he was a drayman. And he had a daughter who became a professor at Howard University. And when she became of high school age, he sent her to school and they refused to take her. So he filed suit against the school board and won. So the schools were integrated, but for days when the black students did go, they would put them in a room and ignore them. Put them in a storeroom and just let them sit there. We have all that transcript from the trial and everything at the center. So that's why it was integrated. And that was in the early 1900s, 1916 or 17. The high school was integrated, but the grade school wasn't.
Which of your kids attended Lincoln School?
None.
None.
The year that they had to integrate, that's the year my oldest child started to school. He was the first kindergarten student.
Where was he the first kindergarten student?
At Washington Elementary here in Gallipolis.
Okay. And you said the high school was integrated about 1917, 19...
Around that time, close to 1920, maybe later. I'm not sure. But it was integrated pretty early because the man filed suit.
You talk about the center, and when you talk, what are you referring to when you talk about
The John G. Black Historical Center.
Tell me about that.
The John G. Used to be a church, John G. AME Church. And in 1998, the membership got very small. We got down to 5 members. Of course, we had a lot of associate people coming. And then we had a very good pastor who was very faithful. He was an undertaker in Huntington, West Virginia, and he came every Sunday. And he was very lenient about money. He didn't care whether he got paid or not, which is unusual in this day and time. And they found out his potential, the Methodist Conference found out his potential, and they moved him to West Virginia, to a bigger church. So we decided then to close because we knew we couldn't get another minister at the money we had to pay. We just couldn't keep up. So, of course, my mother-in-law was the matron of the church when I first married my husband, and I'd always attended there from the time I was married, and she'd always impressed on me not to incorporate, because the incorporation that we would get would automatically put us into the conference, and they'd have a say-so over what would become of the building. So we always refused to incorporate, and that's all it saved us, because I had quite a fight, but eventually got permission to keep the church as a history center from the conference, but it was a struggle to do. So Miss Scott then at that time had already started her history. She'd been compounding history for years, and she and I got together and we copied her books. She allowed us to copy all her black history, and we started out by putting that in there, and then people began to donate, and we have a quarterly program every quarter, and people loan you displays, and then they come back and get them. So we've now 8 years.
And what is your role in the historical?
I'm the president and the director.
What kind of history do you have in that center?
Oh, every sort of black history in Miss Scott's books.
How far back does it go?
Long time. She has her family history, it goes back to slave days when her family lived across the river at Plantation. So it goes way back, but you have to be able to come in and read to really get the full benefit of what is there.
What was the population of Gallipolis in this area, Gallipolis in 1890 to 1900? What was it like?
I have no idea. I don't know.
What do you remember? Can you tell me anything about the black population?
About the black population, well, in the county, I'd say the black population maybe made up 1/10 of the whole population. But now, of course, the population has gotten so low in Gallipolis that it's no longer a city. It's a village, considered a village. It's 5,000, I think, and it has to be over 5,000 to become a city. So we're no longer a city. So the population has really decreased over the past years because of the fact that, of course, there are electric plants here, and most of those jobs are taken, and people stay in them until they retire. So really, there's nothing much to draw people here.
What kind of work did the people do?
At the time, well, in the 1800s and early 1900s, most black people were either barbers or servants in a home, or farmers on their own, maybe outside of town, or most of them worked on the riverboats. That was the main way of making a living.
When did you come to Gallipolis?
I was married in 1946 in February, and I moved to Gallipolis then. I've been here all that time.
And what's your spouse's name?
My spouse's name was Robert Casey.
Where was he born?
He was born in Gallipolis.
Robert was born in Gallipolis.
Mm-hmm.
When?
He was born in 1920.
And how many children do you have?
I have 4 surviving children. I had 5. I have one daughter who's passed.
Could you give us their names?
My children's names are William, Hattie, you want the last name?
Yes.
William Casey, Hattie Stokes, Roberta Marsh, and Morris Casey.
And they were all born. Where were they born?
All born in Holzer Hospital.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to go back and talk about Mr. G. How did he get here to Gallipolis?
Well, according to history records, he came here with a white family that came here and opened a store in Gallipolis. He and the man named Casey. At that time, the Casey was spelled different from what my name is. It was spelled K-A-Z-E-Y. And there are several of those in the cemetery here in Gallipolis. And they don't know whether he was an escaped slave. Don't know whether he's an escaped slave or he was a freed man that just came here with them, and he worked for them for a while, and then he got out on his own. And there in the location where John G is, on Pine Street in that area, it's about 2 streets over from the river, Ohio River, and he bought that land in there. It used to be called Old North, and it was swampland, and he bought it and filled it in and parceled it out and sold it. And then eventually he gave, there's a black cemetery in Gallipolis too. Well, he's the one that donated the space for the cemetery because at that time blacks weren't allowed to be buried within the city limits in the cemeteries. They had to be taken outside or buried on private property. So he donated that so black people would have a place to be buried.
What's the name of that cemetery?
It's Gallipolis Colored Cemetery.
And where's that located?
They're on Pine Street as you come into town, right across from the other cemetery. It's on the other side of the road.
It's on Route.
It's on Route 7 and 160 intermingling right there.
And Mr. G, describe what he might have looked like.
They say he was a very light-skinned man. Now, scuttlebutt has it that supposedly his father was one of the presidents. Can't think now which one, but it's never been documented. But they say that that's how he learned to race horses. He got all his horse knowledge from this president. And he was one of the first persons in Gallipolis to start horse racing and buggy racing and all that. And he started that at the Fairgrounds and trained his sons to do the same. So they were known for their horse racing.
Do you know how many children he had? Oh, we have to wait 1 minute.
Yeah, sorry.
John G. was married twice. He had 2 families, so I'm not sure about his children. I do know of 4 because they were very brilliant people. His one son graduated with honors from Marietta College, and he was a valedictorian. And one son, the last G that lived in Gallipolis, was a postman. He became a mailman, and he didn't like it. So he left here, went to Cleveland, and then he came back and moved the whole family. So from there, we don't know much about the G's.
Did you ever come across the name Evelina G?
No.
In your histories? Okay. That's a dead-end question for me because I know of Evelina G. married a Thomas Woodson, I believe, or raised a Thomas
They were
Woodson.
probably related.
The history of the G family plays a prominent role here in Gallipolis.
Yes, in Black history.
What made Mr. G so rich or popular?
Well, he was, like I say, for his day and time, he was outstanding as an entrepreneur because he started his own business. He was a builder. He could do most anything. And he was so helpful to other people and was so generous with what he did have.
What was his first wife's name?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Was she, do you know if the wives were from Gallipolis or not?
Yes, he married after he came to Gallipolis.
Okay. You have any more questions on that part? Okay. You were talking about a sister that you had named Sawyer. Sawyers. Is that spelled with a
Sawyers.
Okay.
Sawyers.
And where was her husband from?
He was from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, across the river.
What role did the river play in the lives of Black people here in this area?
Like I say, it made quite a few jobs because most of the Black men, that was where they worked, on the riverboats and unloading at the docks and jobs like that, all concerned with the river.
Have you heard any stories about that take you back to the slavery days or the Underground Railroad?
Well, I've heard stories, yes, about it. Like through my grandfather, I've heard the stories about Poke Patch. I heard them from my grandmother because her father and his brothers and father were the conductors of the Underground Railroad in Poke Patch. Now, Poke Patch is located close to Black Fork, Ohio. Well, it's in Black Fork, but on one side of the road is Gallia County, and on the other side is Jackson County. So Poke Patch, of course, was in Gallia County. So they were considered part of the Gallia County Underground Railroad.
What were their names?
Well, the main conductor, my grandfather's name was John P. Stewart.
Say it again.
John P. Stewart. P. Because there's so many Johns, you have to give their initials or you won't know the difference. It's confusing no matter how you tell it. But he and his brothers, and then too, he taught school in Black Fork. He was a very smart man. And he was the first Black supervisor of the brickyard out in Black Fork. That was a big brickyard there. And of course, that Black Fork's in Jackson County.
So Black Fork's in Jackson County. Poke Patch is in.
Poke Patch's part of Black Fork, but it's in Gallia County, on the Gallia County line.
Where the cemetery itself? Where is it? What county is it in?
The cemetery at Black Fork is behind the church,
Behind the church.
behind the main church. But now the Stewarts had their own private cemetery.
Okay, hold on. A noise.
I don't think we're able to stop. I think it's one of the pumps or something started over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's refrigerator system or something.
Okay. Okay, we were talking about the cemetery being behind the church. What's the name of the church in Black Fork? Is that
I know, but can't think of it.
And where would the John Stewart be buried?
They had their own private cemetery
You
up
know-
up on the farm. They owned a large farm. They were pretty well.
Are you getting tired?
No. That dust just makes me cough.
We're not going to hold you much longer.
Okay.
If you were talking about where the Stewarts are buried.
on their own private cemetery, but it's all grown over now. So, and some places aren't stones, so it's not very easy to find.
Is there a road to it?
Yeah, there's a road to it, but it has to be someone from out there that really knows, because like I said, it's so grown up there. Nobody lives up there anymore.
Okay. Who owns the land?
The wood mill there in Chillicothe, Meads bought all that land in.
Okay.
They own it.
Are there any other cemeteries in that area that are grown over?
They say there are, but now students from Athens came one summer from the Wayne Forest, National Forest. I used to attend all those meetings, and I was there the year they came, but they weren't too successful at finding too much.
Do you know anything about the Harris Cemetery?
In Blackpool?
Or in that area?
There probably is. There are a lot of Harrises.
Are you related to the Harrises?
Not that I know of.
Okay. What other family members are you related to in this area? Poke Patch area?
In the Poke Patch area? You name them. I think everybody out there is related because they even intermarried.
What are some of the family names?
Watson, the lady that came there and spoke to me, my cousin, her father's name was Watson. His mother and my grandmother were sisters. And the Watsons, the Gallimores. Yeah, some Harrises I'm related to. I have Harrises who are relatives. And Cradoffs and Keelses.
So could you just repeat who your father's parents were?
My father's parents. My father's mother's name was Florence Singer. His father's name was George Stewart.
And how about your mother's parents?
My mother's parents, her mother's name was Carrie Stewart English. And my grandfather's name was Howard English.
And do you know how your parents met?
I have no idea.
And when were they born? I mean, I don't need the exact date, but what era were they born in?
Let's see, my mother was 15 when she was married. And 17. I imagine she must have been 26 maybe when I was born, maybe not that old, 25. So I was born in 1926. So if she was 16 when she was married, that'd be 9 years. So I'd say 19 and 16 or 15, I don't know.
Okay. Do you know, are you related to any Cokers?
Yes, I find I do have Cokers who are relatives. Like I say, practically everyone in Blackpool is related.
Who else do you know might have been Underground Railroad conductor?
Those are the only people I know of.
And give me their names again.
John P. Stewart, and his whole family, his father and his brothers. He had several brothers, and they were all involved in it. Of course, there were other Underground Railroad conductors out the Porter. There's a marker out there for the Underground Railroad. There's a marker in front of John G. That was Underground Railroad stop. Not the building that's there per se, but across the street when the church was across the street. That was one. And then there are several in town.
Do you know the Kiger family?
The Kigers,
What do you know about them?
the ones that live on
Down by the river?
They don't exactly live on the river. That's what you call a river view. That's what they call the property now. But the Kigers, Miss Kiger was a teacher, and her husband has passed. I really don't know. Her sons are dentists, both dentists in Gallipolis. And she lives in the big house alone. She's been to John G. and told us about her suspicion that at one time the house they lived in was evidently an Underground Railroad site.
Okay.
She had reason to believe it, but I never did go look. Never could catch her.
Right.
But
Did she give a reason for believing that?
the way the rooms were built.
Did she describe them to you? How were they built?
Well, kind of, secluded and hidden in a way, where people could have stayed there and not be known.
She's still living?
Yes, she's still living. And she still lives there.
Do you know of any connection between Poke Patch and a place called Payne Crossing? Have you heard of Payne Crossing?
I've heard of Payne Crossing. I don't know about a connection. Of course, in the Underground Railroad area, All of them were indirectly connected, you know, because they didn't go in a straight line. They deviated so as not to be caught.
Now, how did you hear about Payne's Crossing?
I read about it.
And the other question I want to ask you about the area where you were born, and how far is it from Poke Patch?
Well, the area where I was born, I wasn't born near Poke Patch. I was born on farther up the river, up the Middleport.
Up towards Middleport.
See, so that's not close. We're closer to Poke Patch than that is.
Okay.
But Middleport's right on the river too, you know.
Right. Okay. The reason I want to ask you that is because I want you to tell me what do you know about the furnaces in the Poke Patch area.
The furnaces, all I know is just what I saw as a child. You know, when we'd ride by, I realized what they were and explained it, where they made brick and all that. And I just see the remnants of it now. I didn't know too much about that.
Okay, what furnaces did you ride by? I mean, where were they located?
Well, out in that area, between there and there's a place named Colton. We used to go there to visit people, and between there and Jackson, there was a place we always passed.
Where were your parents born?
My father was born in Middleport, and my mother was born in Rutland, Ohio.
And Rutland's where you were, is that where you were, Rutland where you were born?
No, Middleport.
Middleport, okay.
But Rutland is just about 4 miles from Middleport.
So do you know how your family got from the Poke Patch area, Black Fork area, to the Rutland and Middleport area?
Well, my grandfather, English, was born in Rutland originally. Come to find out, I thought he was born in Jackson, but he wasn't. And he was related to the Woodsons, his mother. So he he had a brother in Jackson, Ohio. They call it Burling Crossroads there. And he met my grandmother, and they married, and they settled in Middleport. He took her to Middleport to live.
And how about your mother's side of the family?
That's my mother's side of the family.
How about your father's side of the family?
Well, my father's side of the family, that's where they lived to begin with. They lived in Pomeroy. Now, my grandmother was from up around Athens, Cutler, Ohio, up around in there.
And what was that grandmother that was from around Athens?
Her name was Florence Singer.
Do you know anything about the Singer family?
Not too much. I've met quite a few of the older ones, but they've all passed. I've been to Zanesville and met quite a few of them. A lot of them are still in Zanesville. A lot of singers up there.
I'm going to just ask this question, but transportation, how did folks get around when you were growing up as a child?
We walked. Or my uncle owned a car. And of course, he'd always take us for rides.
I heard you mention the word dray.
Well, a drayman was the same as UPS is now. Mr. Mitchell was a drayman, and he transported things from the boats when they landed and delivered things to people just like UPS does. That's what a drayman was.
You think you made a pretty good
Oh, he was one of the better, financially better off black people in town.
Don't touch your microphone. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Forgot it was there.
Growing up, what type of things did you do for fun?
For fun? Oh, we jumped rope and played with our neighbors, and we had one halfway bicycle.
What do you mean by halfway?
Halfway, it was raggedy, but we rode it, and we just made our own fun. Just play with dolls, girls.
How about, how often did you attend movies?
Well, at the time, now the movie theater in Middleport was segregated. And you had to sit back in the corner if you were black, which I resented very much. So after I got so old, I was banned from the theater because I went in to break it up.
What would you do?
Took an umbrella and all my girlfriends I could get together, some of the boys, went in and sat where we wanted to, and they had us put out.
Did you ever break the code?
Eventually, yes. Eventually, when it became the law that we could, just went in and did it. And the ironic part of it was foreign people owned the theater. It wasn't even white people. And they were my color.
Speaking of color, what terms are you comfortable with when describing yourself?
describing myself.
Well, you used the word they didn't allow black people in the theater.
Uh-huh.
When we talk about black, or do you prefer
No.
African American, or do you prefer colored?
I prefer colored to black. But then, there you are. They say we aren't colored. You can be any color, but that's what I'm accustomed to. In my day, you were colored. You weren't black. And everybody's not black. So how are you going to apply that to everybody? And everybody's not Afro-American either. So there you are. It's just a matter of choice.
Your parents, did they talk to you much about race and color when you were growing up?
No, we're just a given.
In what way did you find out that this is just the way it is? What kind of messages did you receive?
Well, like I say, especially at school, we weren't made aware of it too much at home because my grandmother she looked like any white woman, and my grandfather was a dark-skinned man. So we were accustomed, to both.
Did you ever have any black teachers in the school systems?
Nope. Not when I went to school.
What other professionals did you have in people of color?
Just ministers. And I told you about the lawsuit. Well, there were some black lawyers, but they always came from Columbus, not local.
Were there any people from this area that went on and became successful?
That airplane.
Oh, okay. Were there any people from this area that you want to talk about, share with us, who became successful?
Well, there's Mr. Mitchell's daughter that he took the case to court about. She became a professor at Howard University. And, oh yeah, there are quite a few people from here that have, made it. Now, at the time John G. first started John G. Church and was on the other side of the road, and it was an old blacksmith shop that had been hauled in there on a hay wagon. And at that time, when they weren't having church, they had a school. It was the first black school in this area. And
What was the name of it?
I knew you were going to ask me. It may come to me. Anyway, see, that's when I need Miss Scott. She's a really historian and can let it roll off from her tongue. But anyway, a man named Bell, who was a poet, he graduated from that school. And then another well-known man who was big, he got to be one of the first representatives. Got to be a representative in Congress. He was one of the first black representatives in Congress. Oh yeah, we've had quite a few people from here who have become very prominent.
Very good. What would you like for us to know about you that we haven't talked about? What would you like to share with us? That you like your grandchildren and your great-great-grandchildren to know about?
Oh? You mean, what would I like my epitaph to be?
Not necessarily that. No. Things that, the kids don't listen to our stories today.
No, they don't.
And we want them to know what happened to us and our ancestors. So.
Well, I'd like them to know my intense interest in history. And I'd like for someone to at least try to carry that on. But I have a son who's extremely interested. My oldest son, he loves history. And he's dragged me all over the country to every black history center he can find. So, I like that aspect, and to know that I've been a decent, honest, caring human being.
You talked a lot about church, just to go back.
Yes.
What religion or denomination do you belong to?
When I was small, we lived next door to the AME church, and there was down on the next corner was a black Baptist church, and we worked together just like we were one. So eventually we closed the AME, and I started attending the Baptist church. So I've been Methodist and Baptist.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My husband's mother and his family were Methodist. So from the time I was married, I attended the Methodist church, John G. Is where I attended all my life, all my grown life, until it closed. And then I went from church to church, decided what I wanted to go and what I wanted to be. And I decided to go back to my home church in Middleport. So I go, it's 20 miles away, but I go to church in Middleport every Sunday.
What kind of illnesses did your family have, and how were they treated when you were growing up?
You're not going to drive out, Freddie?
Yeah, we're going to drive down. Is that going to bother you?
Well, we'll wait. We'll wait for you.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
do you know what time that dinner is?
That what?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock, huh?
Thanks.
Well, I remember when I was a child, quite a few of my relatives had tuberculosis, which was a really ordinary disease at that time. And I remember most of them were cared for at home. At that time, everybody cared for them at home. We didn't realize the danger, you know, keeping them there. Everybody'd be exposed. I can remember that, but they got good care because they were home. And I remember the doctors in our town were very kind to black people. All the doctors would attend you. No problem about that. But now my step-grandfather in Middleport was the only barber in the whole town. But he couldn't cut black people's hair. To cut black people's hair, they had to wait till after hours and come in the back door.
What was your grandfather's name?
He was my step-grandfather. He's my grandmother's second husband after my grandfather passed.
And what was his
His name was Fred Payne. And he was a barber all his life and had the first barber shop in Middleport. So he was, everybody had a lot of respect for him because he was a barber. But we weren't, if we took his lunch, we weren't allowed to come in the front door. We had to go to the back.
And he was a black barber?
He was a black barber, but he couldn't allow us to come in the front door.
Can you tell us why?
He was afraid it would make people, you know, the white people quit coming if they saw black people going in. They'd figure maybe he was cutting black people's hair. So when we took his lunch, we had to take it to the back door. But
Tell us anything you know about Emancipation Day Festival in Gallia County?
I can remember attending.
How long have you been attending?
Oh, probably ever since I was a child, a small child. It was something to look forward to every year.
Has it
That
changed
was-
much?
Oh yes, it used to be just highly attended. One of the big things of the whole year. Everybody looked forward to it. Of course, we don't have all the distractions we have now. We didn't have them then, and they've had big parades in town at the beginning. We used to have big parades in town, and the black ministers would go preach in the white minister's pulpit, and the white ones would come to the black churches and preach at exchange pulpits on that weekend. I can remember that.
What were some of the other activities that you remember?
Oh, they used to have games for kids, pig roast, and catching the pig, and all the things they used to have to do for fun. They'd have all those activities for the children, and of course they used to have the queen thing, but this is the first year they'd ever not had it.
Why not this year?
I'm not free to say. You'd have to ask the Emancipation Board.
Well, is there anything you would like to add? Or do you have any more questions? Do you have anything you'd like to add before we end the interview?
No, nothing special. I appreciate your interest and what I do have to say, and I hope I've been some help.
Oh, great.
Great
Yeah.
help.
I hope I haven't rambled on.
No, not at all. It's been very enlightening, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to spend this time with us and share your stories. And we'll talk more, hopefully, again sometime.
Well, I only wish I knew more about my own family history, but I've hit so many dead ends because the records just aren't that good. And some things I'm not sure about. Some of my older relatives died not in this area, so I don't have the death certificates and all that from them. I'm in the process of trying to get them, but it's a slow process.
If you, I do have one more question for the record. I know you're director and president of the John G. Museum. What would you like you could have the university help you in any way, what would you like for them to do?
Well, you know, what you suggested to me about the students maybe coming to help us, we're really at a loss right now. Information, like I say, is hard to find in there from some of the books we have. You have to be able to sit down and read. And of course, when Miss Scott started her books, she just started them out of scrapbooks. She didn't categorize them. And you have to really read. We've got about 40 books. And to find information on some things, you have no way of really, you know, putting your finger on it. Well, it's not possible to go through those books, Harley, and list that. You know, we have very few volunteers, for one thing, and it's impossible for one or two people to do that. Because on some pages, she has maybe 5 clippings from different things. And because at the time, she wasn't looking forward to this. She was just interested in it. So we really need someone to come in and help us, some volunteers, to come in and help us get all that indexed.
And digitized.
And digitized, yes. That's what we need.
Well, since you're helping us out, I thought it only fair that you put on record about how we can help you.
Well,
So
that's the only way I can figure. And maybe spatial programs, like I say, we have a program every quarter. Sometimes it's hard to come up with something different. Now, next month in October, since it is shortly before Veterans Day, we always have a veterans program. So there's a man here on the grounds today. He's been in the service for years and years, and he's retired from the Navy. And he has so many interesting